think that there needs to be a lot more space for just, conversation that allows people to grow and allows people to go on a journey as opposed to just telling people what to do. So there's a little bit of humility in your approach. And, with that humility brings empathy. And I think that if you don't have empathy, your anti-racism is going to be hollow.
Hi everyone, welcome to our podcast, So She Can Speak. Today we are super happy to have this very special guest on today's episode. You can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Uju Asika. I am a blogger. I'm a mum of 2 boys, and I'm the author of Bringing Up Race, How to Raise a Kind Child in a Prejudiced World.
Thank you so much for being here today with us. We really appreciate the time that you're taking. And we'd love to hear more about your story. So please do share.
So where do I begin? I was born in Nigeria. I grew up in England. Then we would go back and forth in the holidays. So I grew up in England. I went to a boarding school in England. And my parents were in Nigeria, so then I would go home in the holidays. So I had very much a mixed cultural upbringing. Then for my graduate studies, I schooled in the States. So that gave me a really interesting perspective on sort of race and culture. And then I went back to live in Lagos for a little bit, which is where I got together with my husband. We moved back to London, and London is where I'm based. And that's where I just do my writing and speaking and general mothering.
Oh, yeah. I think it's really cool that you're able to experience so many different perspectives. So thank you for sharing that little bit about yourself. So could you tell us more about your book, Bring Up Race, How to Raise a Kind Child in a Prejudiced World? To me, it really stands out as being a very one-of-a-kind book, because you don't often see, at least where I am, you don't often see many books like this. So could you just tell us a little bit about what it's about?
Yeah, so Bringing Up Race, a lot of what it's about is in the title or in the subtitle, How to Raise a Kind Child in a Prejudiced World. It's really a book aimed at parents and families, but also anyone. I've had people from all different backgrounds and ages reading the book. And the goal is to get people to start having more open and nuanced conversations around race, and to raise a generation who can make changes and sort of create a fairer, kinder, and safer world for everyone, where everyone feels included. So that's the main aim of the book, is to have conversation that leads to transformation.
I really like that aspect of creating a whole new generation that is more geared towards solutions together and a more kind approach when connecting with one another. So thank you for doing what you do and for persevering to get this work out. All right. And your book talks about race, anti-racism, bias, and white privilege. For you personally, why did you feel compelled to write a book on these topics?
I think the first thing personally is just that I'm a mother. I'm a mother raising 2 Black boys in a society which is quite multicultural. London is very diverse, but at the same time, they're growing up having to face challenges of racism and unconscious and conscious bias, specifically as to boys who are now a teenager and a teenager. So it's kind of a crucial time for them. So there was a real personal incentive for me. But I think also just as a parent and as a Black woman, I felt there were so many experiences that I wanted to share and conversations that I wanted to open up with other parents so that they really understood that they had to engage in this conversation. A lot of times people who are people of color, or, if you're Black, you've grown up with certain messages around race. And I found that a lot of my white friends, white mothers, might not have had any conversations with their children about race because A, they didn't think of themselves as racialized on some level, and B, they didn't really know where to begin to have a conversation around race. And C, there was this narrative around being colorblind and how everyone should just sort of rub along together and we shouldn't talk about race because it wasn't really polite. And we were past race, we were beyond racism because, you know, now society was very fair. So so those are the main reasons that I wanted to write it. I wanted to sort of say, okay, we actually have to have these conversations, and it can't just be a sort of monologue between Black parents and their kids, or between people of color and their kids. It has to be everybody. Everybody has to engage. So those are the main sort of drivers for me to write the book.
Yeah, okay, very interesting. And I really like how you brought up the point of colorblind. I think today so many people think the phrase, I don't see color as a good thing or positive. And in reality, you know, our identity is what makes us who we are and builds up so many of our experiences. Yeah. And then what role do you think parents and guardians have in our lives, especially when it comes to understanding race? I feel like in recent years, parents feel more responsibility to bring it up just because of recent events. But personally, you know, what do you think the importance of parents are in our lives when it comes to understanding the world in this way?
I think it's crucial. You know, I think parents really are where the education begins. There's a lot of onus on schools to have these discussions. Unfortunately, there's a lot of pushback in the education system as well, and a lot of gaps in the education system. So I think as a parent, you really have to be proactive and consider not only how your child will be affected by race and racism, but also what kind of impact your child is going to make. You know, how will your child engage when they go out into the world and see somebody else having an experience that's to do with race? You know, how will your child have the courage to speak up? Will your child stay silent? You know, what will you do if your child encounters racial bullying or is bullied because of their race? You know, so as a parent, you have to be quite proactive and engaged. And it's a really good time to sort of examine your own upbringing and your own unconscious or conscious biases, you know, to keep learning and to make it like a family learning project. That's what I always try and tell people. It should be a whole family project, and it's really sort of a lifelong learning project as well. It's not just having one conversation or reading one book or, you know, going to one event. It's just stay open and keep engaging around race with your family, and then it becomes normal and you embed it as a family value, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, I love that, how it really is a family learning project. And, you know, learning about race and our biases isn't a one-time thing. It's for a lifetime, because it really helps set in this value for us and then for next generations to come. All right, shifting gears a little bit here. I know you also run a blog called Babes About Town. Well, why did you decide to start this blog? I know it is specifically geared towards families and kids as well. And so why did you decide to start it, and what motivates you to continue writing?
Yes, I started this blog over almost 12 years ago now, which is crazy to me when I think about it. I launched it again from personal reasons. I had just moved back to London when I had the idea, and I had my first son, and then I suddenly felt a little bit adrift because I didn't know what I could do as a new mother in London. Could I go to the theatre? Could I go to museums? Could I take him to a restaurant? I was just a little bit lost. So I thought, well, you know, it'd be great if there was this site that would tell me all of that, you know, what I could do. And so it wasn't until I had my youngest, when he turned 1, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to launch it myself. So I created Babes About Town, which is really about cool things to do for families. For, I always say, fun-loving families raising cool and curious kids in London and beyond. So, it's all about just, you know, taking them to museums and theatre and just having an immersive cultural experience, but also focusing on stuff that's interesting for you as the parent, not just like your typical, baby groups and all the things that actually become a little bit monotonous after a while as a new parent. So so that's why I started the blog. And what motivates me to keep writing it, I think just my community, the messages I get from readers. Even now, I still get messages from readers, who are just having babies and are so pleased to have found the blog. So, I think that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, that's really great. And I'm really glad that you took the initiative. I feel like maybe, at least from in the United States and in my generation with people I surround myself with, family or parent written content that's kind of underrated. And so I think it is even more important though, because kids are the future. They have so much power to do things. And so any content or like blogs that you're writing about them are a really great thing. Yeah. And then as a Black woman in the creative industry, what struggles have you faced and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, I think just the main struggle, I would say, as a Black woman in the creative industry or even any industry is a struggle of being taken seriously. And I think part of that is an internal thing. I've experienced a lot of imposter syndrome, despite having had a good education and coming out of school with really good results. You still have that slight sense of, having to work twice as hard to sort of get half as noticed, and B, just feeling like you're not quite gonna have the same opportunities or perhaps make the same impact as you might do if you were a white man. And then obviously I have things like my name. My name is a Nigerian name, and I think about times where I was sending out my CV and not really getting anywhere. And you don't know that actually, from the research I've done, and which I included in my book, name prejudice is a massive barrier actually for a lot of people of African, Asian, Muslim origin, because a lot of companies look at your name and go, that's not the standard Eurocentric name that we're looking for. And then they shove your resume, your CV aside. So those are some of the barriers. And how I've overcome that is really just by being independent. I've worked for myself for quite a long time now, and I've often worked as an independent contractor. So if I'm not working for myself, I'm working with a team, but still there's a level of independence. So I think having that autonomy has kind of helped me. And, I think it's a privilege really, because I've worked in the creative industries and I'm a writer. So that allows you to be able to work for yourself and work from home and work around your kids. But yeah, I think those are some of the challenges and how I've overcome them.
Yeah, well, thank you for being genuine and honest with us, sharing those experiences. I definitely relate in a sense to the name thing, even though my first name is Alyssa, my last name is Monteagudo, which definitely not American, a normal American name. So I feel like when I meet people, it's like a guessing game of them trying to guess what Asian ethnicity I am or something like that. And it's really not a fun thing to do. So I definitely, see how, names are such an important thing in our lives. At least to me, it really helps keep me grounded, my first, middle, and last name. So I really appreciate how you brought up that aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, names are just absolutely, I have a whole chapter in bringing up race, and it's called What's in a Name? And it's really all about name discrimination, but also taking pride and teaching your kids to take pride in the name that they've been given, because it's it's your legacy, and it's in some ways it's your power, your name. So I think we should all be encouraged to embrace so-called difficult or different names.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you included that, and that you said like pride in the name. We don't often think about the power a name has, but it does have a significant part in our lives, or adding up to our identity. And then moving on to our next question, with recent events that have been going on and news issues, what do you think of how young generations today are dealing with race and biases?
I'm really impressed by the younger generation, and I feel very hopeful as well. So I'm pleased, because I've written a book all about raising kids who are kinder and fairer. And I do see the younger generation as having a lot more, they're just a lot more conscious. People sometimes like make fun of them as being, too woke or whatever. But, what is woke apart from being conscious? Just being conscious, being aware. And when you're conscious, it allows you to engage with, politics, but also on an individual level in a much safer and kinder way. So I'm really impressed. And the one thing I would say, my one cautionary thing is just, I do think they need to leave more space for nuance. Sometimes, specifically in social media, where the conversation can be very, very sort of black and white and very like binary in a way. And I think that there needs to be a lot more space for just, yeah, conversation that allows people to grow and allows people to go on a journey as opposed to just telling people what to do. So that's my only kind of caveat for the younger generation. But on the whole, I think what they're doing is great. I think that like the Black Lives Matter movement wouldn't have happened without young people specifically getting up and getting out into the streets and sort of forcing that conversation into a wider public space.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for bringing that up. I just had a question on another note. Is you brought up how social media plays a big part, especially in young generations' kind of use of taking in information, but also social media is kind of a new form of activism nowadays. And you mentioned the term woke, and I think it's very controversial because we see people who stay woke on social media or seem like they are knowledgeable or aware of these issues, but in reality are not. So I guess in your opinion, what is the difference? Like, how can we be anti-racist versus someone just being woke or knowing about these issues on a surface level? Like, what's the difference, and how do we push ourselves to be more anti-racist actively?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And, you're right. There's a lot of performance on social media and also a lot of noise. And I think sometimes just, come off social media, like come away from all of that noise and all of that clutter and seek out your own sources of education. Keep looking for sources. When you're in school and you're learning something, you don't just like go on social media and get all your information and go and write a report. You go and read a book, or you go to the library, or you look on, you research. So I think that, engaging with activism, anti-racism, but any form of activism coming, like I said earlier, from a learner perspective, so that you're always learning rather than thinking that you have to be out there sort of teaching and schooling and correcting people, come at it as a learner. So there's a little bit of humility in your approach. And, with that humility brings empathy. And I think that if you don't have empathy, your anti-racism is going to be hollow on some level. So you want to focus on developing your empathy, developing humility, and developing your knowledge, which has to be beyond social media. There's a lot of great sites on social media that teach and keep the conversation at the forefront, which is awesome, but don't let that be your only source of information. Read more books.
Thank you so much for sharing that insight. I think that's something I definitely have to remember and keep in mind, is that social media can say so much, and it's really beneficial to take a break and do some of my own thinking. So I do really appreciate you sharing that. And then, do you have any advice on how to feel empowered and educated in what feels like such a prejudiced world?
Yeah, I think, sometimes just take a breather, come away from the news. Sometimes I just like we shut off the news because it can be too much. And especially if you're focused on a particular area, then that area can feel overwhelming because you just see it all the time. So for me, I see a lot of racial injustice, and some days I'm like completely overwhelmed. And then I'm like, okay, just shut off the news, do something different, and then come back to it with a clearer mind. When you have a clearer head and a more balanced perspective, it actually allows you to feel more empowered, because then you think, okay, I can do, these are the practical things I can do. These are the ways I can collaborate with someone else to make an impact. This is a conversation that I need to have. So you can sort of have clearer and more focused impact, rather than just sitting in a stew of misery and depression, which is what often happens when you're watching the news and it's like constant. And so I would say just take a break, switch off the news cycle, do something different, and then let your mind wander. Then you can become creative, because a lot of activism needs creativity and needs people's ideas and use of resources and collaborating with other people in a creative way. So yeah, just take breaks, be creative, and regroup.
Thank you. On a side note, I do have a couple more questions. I did schedule the interview until 8, but I don't know how strict your timing is. So is it okay if I... Is
Yeah,
that okay? Okay, cool. Yeah, so now I've come up with some questions on my own to ask as well. And you mentioned, mental health and taking breaks. And I feel like mental health is something that we need to talk more about in activism.
Mhm.
So for me personally, I work with a lot of other youth. And so I'm really fortunate for us to collectively understand that we have to take a mental health break at times and have to be aware that we're not always going to be running at 100%. That's something I definitely have to be more mindful about. But in your opinion, in your own experiences, how do you take care of your mental health when it seems like nothing is changing for the positive, or you're doing all of this work and nothing is happening? Like, how can you keep yourself grounded and, most importantly, like, continue to stay passionate about those things?
Yeah, good question. Like I said, one of the things I do is just come off, just literally have a clean break from the news cycles, switch it off, do something completely different in our home. Like I always say, we like to center joy, we like to center playfulness. And I think that, in as much as we talk about racial justice and the need for racial justice, a lot of it is just, focusing on our humanity. And your humanity should be centered on, the things that make you feel alive, like joy and connection and friendship and play. So, we're very, very playful in our house. So that's one way. And another thing is just give yourself space as well. Give yourself space to vent, give yourself space to rant, even if it's just with, I wouldn't recommend going on social media and just ranting and ranting. Some people do, that's good, but I wouldn't recommend it like as a habit, because that can become sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's just a misery, thread of misery. But I would just, take space and vent, rant, sort of express your anger and your dismay and your upset, and let it out. I like to journal personally. So journaling, writing about everything that I think is just hideous. I can make a list of hideous things. And then after that, it's like, okay, I've got that out, and I can just take a breath and focus on the things that are positive, the things that give me hope. I always turn to something like my Anjali's poetry, or, a film, or just, there's always good news that you can find as well. So you have to actively look for the good news and actively focus on hope, and, look for connection, just connect with people. And these are the things that kind of ground you and make you feel more empowered, rather than, focusing too much on the negative stuff, because there's so much negative stuff, but there's a lot of positive stuff happening as well. So it's really, really important to keep perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing those tips. I think for me, especially, I will definitely have to keep that more in mind. And I really like how you continuously brought up the idea of humanity and how, humanity is centered around joy, things that keep you happy and make you feel alive. So, yeah. Okay. So, last question. But, what hopes and goals and, things would you like to see the young generations come to do? Or maybe not even in young generations, but our world in general. I know obviously these um, systemic issues and inequalities won't disappear in one day, but what do you hope to see in the future?
I hope to see more empathy, specifically with our leaders. I look around the world, and especially during these pandemic times, it's been very, very clear the countries with the leaders who are driven by empathy and caring versus the leaders who are driven by other interests, shall we say, interests that are a little bit more self-serving or that are more sort of economic or that are more about themselves than the community. So I'd love to see empathy at the heart of leadership, because I think that would be the biggest transformation we could have, as a collective. But my main thing is just for the kids. I want us to raise more kids who are change makers and who see themselves as change makers, who feel empowered to make change. Whatever that looks like. Change makers sounds like a really lofty title, but all it is just like a child who sees another child who isn't being included and invites that child in. That's a change maker. So I want to see more of that, across society in general, and yeah, definitely around the world.
Okay, great. Well, I cannot thank you enough for sharing your wisdom and insight with us today. I really enjoyed all the points that you brought up, and I'm super glad to have had you on the podcast. I really enjoyed hearing you get to speak. So thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. Would you be able to share your social media platforms, more about where to find your blog and book?
Yes, so you can follow me on @BabesAboutTown, which is where I am on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. My blog is at babesabouttown.com, and you can find my book wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, which supports independent bookshops. And you can find out more about it at bringingupbase.com.
Well, thank you so much. This concludes today's episode of So She Can Speak. Again, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you sharing all those pieces with us. So make sure to subscribe to So She Can's YouTube channel and like this video, and let us know what your thoughts are in the comments below. All right, thank you, everyone.